photography chart updated here in 1966. The image was first put on in an earlier chart, and that's the Empress of Asia right there. There's Sultan Shoal Lighthouse. The chart is very accurate. That's exactly the heading of the ship and the dimension. And here it says she dries 6 feet. So in 1966, she didn't dry 6 feet at all, but when this chart was first drawn, it was. Drying 6 feet means that at low water, there was 6 feet of the hull sticking out of the water. But what happened was that, and we know this from subsequent salvage reports, she anchored upright, but before she sunk to the bottom, I suspect all the fires in the coal storage holes warped the plates, and therefore let water in through the warped hull plates. And she listed to one side, and she sunk in, so this is fathoms, 10 fathoms, 60 feet of water, about 18 meters of water, and she sunk on her side. And from that first image I showed, the width was 68 feet, and she's 60 feet wide, 60 feet in the water, which leaves that 6 feet sticking out at low tide. So we're sitting flat on the seabed. But very soon after the war, the first salvage operations commenced. And super interesting, in the Straits Times there's reports of the Japanese coming down years after the war, just a few years after, and offering to salvage the Empress of Asia, which they sunk. They also offered to salvage the repulse from the Prince of Wales up the coast of Malaysia. And their offer was about to be accepted, except there was a big furor in the population of Singapore and they got kicked out. So the International Salvage Association was formed, and they started in 1957, and they recovered thousands of tons of metal, 60 feet of water. And you've got the notice to mariners, so that they still come out. The MPA issues notices to mariners whenever there's activity going on where the commercial shipping has to divert to keep clear. So they were doing blasting over all those years, 57 to 61. And this is an observation that I've since made. 2/3 of the ship was salvaged, including 40 meters of the bow, all the starboard hull planking, all the boilers and the turbines. In the 90s, it was actually known before the 90s. I know friends in the Tunneling Club Dive Centre used to dive on it in the 80s. But this guy claims to have found it in 1994, somewhere in this article, and they did some salvage work, I think it was 98, and then they donated what they brought up to, at that time it was called the Singapore History Museum, which is now the National Museum. And they found 4 anchors, apart from some other artifacts. Those anchors are not Empress of Asia anchors. They are the anchors from commercial shipping that just anchored over the site. That chart I showed before had a wreck marker buoy so people could avoid the wreck. Later that was removed. I'm not sure why. Because a lot of ships have lost their anchors. They get caught in the steel wreckage and they have to cut the chain and lose their anchor. So these anchors are not from the Empress of Asia. They're much too small. I'm only showing this picture because I wanted to show the new Sultan Shoal in the background there. But this is 2016, and that's been reclaimed much more comfortable. But now it's right in the midst of the Tuas megaport, literally a stone's throw up one of the huge piers that now stick out. And that's essentially led to the demise of the limited remains of the Empress of Asia. It was in a fairway for the new megaport, so it had to be removed. So we were brought in, this is when I was with the ICES Yusuf Ishak Institute, and we were diving on the site for a week or so just to get an idea of what remained, whether there are any artifacts still visible, and to determine the condition of the hull remains. And we had access to the multi-beam survey that had been done by the port survey company. So this is as the ship was back in 2016. And this is a very unusual image to get to a shipwreck. All these parallel lines. And it was only later that we discovered that you can see these lines here are actually looking in the side of the ship at the decks. It's like looking in that image I first showed, the line drawing of each deck. And this is sort of, it's taken north to south, but the bottom of the ship is down here. This used to be the superstructure up here. Visibility was quite bad, but we did find some things, like tiles in a bathroom. Interestingly, in some places, despite the fact there's teredo worm and it was fully exposed, there are hull planks. I mean, deck planking, not hull planks. So for the promenade deck for the first class passengers, they could have been walking right on that spot. And that's the coal that was used to fire the turbines. and that's a spring damper probably from the engine room under one of the engines. So once it was decided that the ship had to be removed, the Dutch are great at this stuff. They have cutter suction dredges which suck with massive pumps. They suck all the sediment off the seabed. You can't go and put a cutter suction dredge down on a steel wreck because you'll just smash your cutter suction dredge. So what they did, they reversed the pumps. And so they blew down this massive water towards the seabed. And so this exposure of the hull here is caused by blowing all the sediment out to the side. So you've got this much clearer picture of what remains. And that allows us to then superimpose the drawing of the ship. And that's how we can see that the whole bow has disappeared, gone. Engine rooms are all empty. All the turbines, all the boilers have been salvaged. Stern is gone. The entire superstructure is gone. So the only bit that's left is on the port side, the lower side planking, and probably just a small percentage of the internal workings of the ship. There's not much left of it at all. So what happened was we got a few artifacts during that survey period, and then we got access to, we weren't allowed on the site during the actual salvage, apparently because it was too dangerous. But when everything was brought in on barges, then we got access to quite closely look through everything that came ashore. And therefore we can start identifying parts of the ship and the various artifacts that we found. So first of all, we go here, we've got this special dining room, and we know exactly where that was because it's the only place along the ship that's got 3 portholes in a row, large portholes in a row. And those are the 3 large portholes that came up as wreckage. I don't know what goes on in a special dining room. It would be very intriguing to find out. But here's our link to the Titanic. So Titanic is a super famous ship. Singapore actually has a small version of the Titanic right here. These windows, these ports, are probably from the same manufacturer. It's a pretty unusual design with the straight edges on each side, exactly the same size and configuration. These are different manufacturer, but it's the same type of porthole, which is very unusual. These are the portholes that are down on the bottom deck, just above the waterline. So people want to be able to see in and out, but they can't risk a wave coming into their cabin. So when the waves are getting high, they close the glass port, and this valve on the top allows the ventilation. The wind comes through, but if a wave comes up, it lifts there's a float in here. It lifts the float, which then seals the vent. So the water doesn't get in, you still get the ventilation. Very clever. This is the deck fitting. So this is the actual picture on the first class promenade deck on the Empress of Asia. That's the fitting there. They're nice high-res images, so I could zoom in. That's the fitting. And this is the one that we got from the wreckage. Maybe it's even the same fitting. Who knows? And that's the one from the Titanic. So it's slightly different design, but the same concept, same configuration. These are the anchor bits, or the hawse line bits. So when they tie in alongside a wharf, the ropes would go around here. I still don't quite know what those caps are for, but the Titanic has the same caps on their bits. And that image there shows the rail on the Titanic. I showed it before, that replica that was in Singapore. And this rail is exactly the same as that one, but this one's on the Empress of Asia. And that's a small remnant of the rail that came up in the salvage. And this is why I mentioned the davits before. So here the davits for the lifeboats on the Titanic, these are the pivoting davits. You have that thread there that moves the davit back and forwards. It's all the way back here when it's on deck, and it goes all the way forward when they launch it off the side. And this is the Empress of Asia, exactly the same mechanism for a pivoting davit. This is probably the best artifact on the whole ship. So these days you'd have a thing like that would be a sticker on the side of the hull. But this is a beautiful brass plaque, and it's the emergency lowering brake for the lifeboats. It tells you what to do if the brake fails. You pull on the A brake, which you have to be really fast before the poor people in that boat hit the water. But the fascinating thing here is it's got shrapnel holes in it. So that could have been when the bomb was dropped in Bunker Strait and sent shrapnel through the lifeboats, or probably more likely when the 3 bombs hit the boat just off the western entrance to Singapore Strait. But that's a very powerful artifact showing the whole history of the ship in one artifact. We've got large chunks of the hull, so this little square port here with a porthole next to it is where they loaded the coal on board. This is the hole, the ports are open in this case, and it's sort of automated. They've got a train coming alongside using a crane to put the coal into the storage hole. But in some places, they didn't have it automated. It was all done by hand, and that's just coolies who are doing this work, manually loading coal into the ship. Then we have these very interesting, I mean, it looks horrible, that's rust. It's a rust soup going down the deck of the barge with this, it's a wrought iron decorative element. And this is I was mentioning the long banquet table in the first class dining saloon, that's the table, that's the balustrade above it. And that part of the balustrade is exactly that. Look carefully, you can see exactly that design. So that's very nice to have. I would have preferred to have this, of course. And this one too. So when the first class passengers stepped on board on the upper deck, they came in here. This is a small version of the grand staircase on the Titanic. They came down here, went down to the dining saloon down below. But that element there, right there, it's exactly that one. So it's a nice memento. And then we have this here. First of all, we got all these gentlemen dressed to the nines. And now we know the meaning of that if you count those gentlemen. And back there, that's the vent. It's a vent from a door. Maybe the same vent. This is a fantastic find, and I was very surprised to get it. It's the compass, or a compass. And here down here, it's Kelvin. Kelvin is the maker of the compass. And of course, it's the famous Kelvin, who was a great physicist, but he also developed the compass, vastly improved the compass, and it was his compass that was on the Titanic as well. That was recovered. Now this one, we know that the bridge was burnt down, so it couldn't have been from the bridge. It does have signs of melting. That little side part there was probably a light on the side of the compass. This is the bridge where we've got the main compass, you've got these big balls, it's soft iron, so that corrects the deviation of the compass because of all the other metal on the ship. There's another one over here, so they're replicated, but this was all burnt. But on the very stern of the ship, you've got a compass mounted above deck level, and that's just used to go into port to go alongside a wharf, so I suspect that the compass we found was from there. Then we got these interesting little knickknacks here. The hairdresser, that's the hairdresser right there, just in from the first class recreation space. And the issuing room, I don't know what was issued in the issuing room, but there it is, further down inside the hull. And the third class entrance, that's when it was called third class and not steerage, right there. Fireman's entrance, so this is not a fireman that puts out fires, this is a fireman that lights fires. These guys are responsible for shoveling the coal into the boilers. So these are the firemen's quarters, and next to them you've got, there's trimmers. So the trimmers are the ones that level off the coal to make sure it doesn't become unstable in the storage area. And then you've got cleaners and all sorts of things. So this is right down the bottom of the ship, that's all the working crew on board the vessel. This is a fantastic artifact, super heavy, very durable. This is the valve for operating a toilet. Right there, that's the valve. It's made by shanks, and you don't have to touch it, very sanitary. You push it down with your foot once you finish your business. And this is the Shanks Manufacturing Company, and Shanks also supplied Titanic, exactly the same thing on the Titanic. And this is why the ship that's operating for whatever it was, 30 years, will probably never need any maintenance on something like that, very solid construction. This is purely decorative. We had no idea what this was. It's just solid bronze. But then we found some of the pictures of the first class consumption bedrooms, and then you get these decorative elements on their bed. And the lamp. So this lamp is just above the mirror here, and that's a very distinctive design, and we found some of those as well. This one is just a small vase. I show this partly to show the conservation process. So this is as we found it, and this is after cleaning in some mild citric acid a bit more cleaning and a bit more cleaning, like about a lot. And then we polished it up, and that was the original thing. I had no idea what was there in this situation. And then we get some of the tableware. This was serving the first class passengers, but it's all got CPR, Canadian Pacific Railway. So initially I thought maybe this is what they're using on the trains, and they had surplus and they put it on the ship, but the ship was actually owned by this company, so it would have been put directly on the ship. Elkington is the company, Elkington and Co. made the silverware. They made it for A.T. Wiley. There was a supplier who then supplied Canadian Pacific Railway Company, and that's why it's got the logo on. So it's 3 layers. There's a nice dish there. So again, when these things were found, they were in the same condition as that vase I just showed. There's a lot of conservation work involved in getting to this point. And then we have a cover, a tureen cover, but this one has CPS, Canadian Pacific Steamship Company, so it's a bit later. But it implies that railway stuff had been on board the ship ever since it was launched. But later on they get newer stuff as they change the name of the shipping company. A lot of cutlery, some of it very high quality, different manufacturer. This is Knapp and Webb doing this one. The one with the broad arrow and the date, this is supplied by the British military. The broad arrow is all military supplied equipment. This one is from the United States Navy. This very crude knife, that's not silver plated, it just looks polished. That's just iron. And this one has got the Canadian Pacific Steamship logo on it. There's this one here that's got Canadian Steamship with the Seagull Company. So there's a lot of different logos for the same company. This is the United States Navy one. The thing I find interesting here is it's got this pierce. It's pierced like a needle, but it's a fork. I have no idea what that's for. And then we have the finer ware. This is really high class. It's a butter knife, first class. This is the image of the very blown up image of the dining area I showed before. There it is, right there. And here's an example that survived in somebody's collection. This one, from the old Elkington and Company catalogue, we find that this is a biscuit, butter and cheese dish. This is part here, this came from there. This is a mustard pot, going right back to the days of the Canadian Pacific Railroad, and this is a spoon, possibly the spoon that goes into the mustard pot there. This is a marrow spoon. So you're getting the marrow out of a bone, different sized bones. That's for a narrow one, that's for a wide one, with the name of the company that made it again. I think it's Elkington again, and Canadian Pacific Railway on the back of a marrow spoon. There we have our coffee pot from that beautiful first class veranda. There it is, right there. It's just missing the wooden handle and the stand. And it's from the period of the Canadian Pacific Steamship Company. Teapot with a nice logo on the side. That's a museum piece that survived. That's our piece. And there, of course, is a huge array of silverware, but it's all buried under this massive Easter feast that's been prepared. So that just gives you some idea of how opulent it was on these vessels. This guy doesn't look very happy about it. He's had to do all the work. This one, so I was talking about these unstable flower vases. This is one of the flower vases right here, Canadian Pacific Railway. And we've got these candlesticks. This was recovered by those guys that were out there in the 90s. And this is a bit of a paradox here. So the ones here in the image, I think this is an image from the Empress of Russia, but these are sort of fake candlesticks. They're electric. They've got a bulb on the top. This one's got a hole there for a wire, so I suspect that was also an electric candlestick. But this one came up with the snuffing device. You don't snuff out an electric light. So maybe that's a real candlestick, but they're identical otherwise. And then some of the nicer fittings, so that's a handle possibly going into the dining area. This is a fascinating one. It's just a copper alloy cup. It's been embossed. But down the side here is some script, and it seems to be Arabic script. I haven't deciphered it. And this is another odd one. I thought this was a bit of machinery. I thought it was actually from an engine, like a piston cover. But it's got CPOS, which was another of the many names, Canadian Pacific Ocean Services, which is advertised here. If anyone's got any idea what that might be, please let me know later on. And we got a little bit of ceramics. Ceramics didn't survive very well in a situation where there'd been huge salvage and dynamiting and what have you. This cup did survive remarkably. Otherwise, we can see that there were companies in the UK, in England, specifically making ceramics, cutlery, what have you, for that steamship company, except for this one, which is a lid of a Chinese teapot. And those first drawings above, they actually had, that I had at the beginning, had a Chinese galley and a Chinese dining area. So a lot of the crew going across the Pacific would have been Chinese. We have this is the wheel from a ham slicing machine. And it's cast iron. Cast iron actually survives quite well underwater, although it can be very brittle. And there it is, exactly the same wheel, same company, and there it is on board the Empress of Ireland, a sister ship, right there. It's a hand slicing machine in the galley. This is evidence of the fire. So we've got one of the silver plates is melted, a fork is melted through the bottom of it. All these spoons are melted together. And in this case, it's a pile of dishes. Now, the porcelain doesn't melt. Porcelain's like stone, but the glaze can melt. So the glaze is melted and they're all stuck together by the glaze. Glass melts, that's for sure. This section here, and it's on the drawing, there's one room called the wine room. I suspect this is it. So we have all of this glass, and that was a bottle. It's just become a melted blob. So these are the few intact bottles we did get. This one has melted, these ones not. This one's got a date, 1935 on it. So either it was put on later, being in someone's store, or it was some condiment that nobody was very keen on, and it survived on board for quite some time. And of course, it was carrying 2,200 troops, so they all had their weapons on board. Many of the cargo holds would have been full of the weapons to provide these troops when they came ashore at Singapore, which they never did with their weapons at all. The Enfield rifle was issued to all soldiers. This is all that remains. That's a bayonet. Just there, it's a mounted bayonet. Actually on the rifle, which is unusual, is the bayonet itself there. And this is part of the webbing there and there, coming off one of those rifles. But of course the wood is all gone. And this is a oil. It's a little oil container. BSA is the Birmingham Small Arms Company. That company also made the Enfield rifles along with many other companies. And that's their logo right there. And this is a one-off, the boys' anti-tank rifle. We found one of those. That strap is our strap, that's not the original strap. It's really heavy. So these guys have mounted on a tripod, also made by the same company that made the Lee Enfield rifle. And one revolver, not in very good shape. But lots of webbing. So many of these little pieces here, belt buckles, what have you. This piece is identical to that, which is still existing piece of webbing, and you can see the poor guys are covered in the stuff. So there's many bits of that still on the collection. This one's interesting because we found it in many parts in different places, but we could put it all back together, and it's a paraffin, like a brazing torch. And this is the manufacturer, and that's what it would have looked like originally when all those parts were together. This is a great find. That's what it looked like on the deck of the barge after it had come up. And after a lot of conservation, this is what we found. So the immediate assumption was this is from some guy that was on the Canadian Pacific Railway. That's a railway engine, a steam engine. But it turns out that all the advertising for watches, irrespective of who used it or where it's going, featured trains because trains were supposed to be on time. So it's got nothing to do with the Canadian Pacific Railway at all. We have no idea who owned that watch. A Gillette safety razor, a very early version. And I don't think there were any horses on board, so this is not a horse syringe. I'll allow you to draw your own conclusions on what that was used for. And we have this is a military issue, it's got the broad arrow on it, surgical scissors. So the ship itself had a hospital, the Empress of Asia had a hospital, but while it was serving as a troop ship, I'm sure it had more than that one space. So this could have come from anywhere or belonged to one of the medics on board. So having gone through that wide list of material, we now have some on display. There was some on display at the National Museum a few years ago for an anniversary of World War II. This is currently on display. The MPA Maritime Gallery has these pieces on display. And this is Arch Square, which is relatively new. It's 125 Jalan Sultan, if anyone wants to go and look at a silver spittoon. And this particular spittoon, it's got lead in the bottom of it. And the lead has melted, but the silver has not. So the lead's all flowed across to one side and re-solidified. The reason there's lead in there is because you don't want a sort of unstable spittoon on a rolling ship when it's full. That one's pertinent because it's a part of a firefighting hose. And a very nice little tap made by a South African company that was supplying taps. Big silverware before it was restored. And these other ones are completely unrelated. I have no idea why they're in the same cabinet. But hopefully later this year there's going to be more material from Empress of Asia in Arch Square as well. So there we have it. Farewell as the Empress of Asia sails over the horizon. Thank you.